Now, to begin our conference, I think Honorable U.S. Congressman Kevin Brady has been opening these conferences since it began. And it is quite an honor to do it. I remember the event that he was engaged in a filibuster in Congress, and he had to do it live. So we had it in Congress here on the screen. It was amazing. He could do question and answer there. So it's my distinct honor to welcome Kevin and this great tradition in opening our conference. So Kevin joins us to help kick off the Economic Conference. He's the new chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Energy Tax Working Group, and chairman of the House Ways and Means Health Subcommittee. It is also great to have a chamber guy, a pro-family, pro-business conservative in these key positions in Congress. Just badly needed now. Kevin is working hard to close the growth gap between how our economy is performing, how it should perform under pro-growth policies, and how to cap federal spending relative to the size of our economy. It's amazing the federal government can't reduce 1% of its spending. Being in government, I think we can find a way to do that. Kevin's signature bills, the MAP Act and the Sound Dollar Act, have been lauded as the most comprehensive and well-conceived plan ever to reduce the size of federal government, and quoted as one of the greatest pieces of legislation in history by policy experts at the American Enterprise Institute and former Reagan budget official Larry Kudlow, respectively. On the House Ways and Means Committee, Kevin's background in chamber work guides him to work on simplifying our tax codes so it doesn't punish our innovators, job creators, energy manufacturers, while ensuring a strong and free market in the nation's healthcare industry so we can continue to have the best healthcare system in the world. Well, what a concept. Please join me in welcoming U.S. Congressman Kevin Brady.
Bruce, thank you. At some point, you're just making that stuff up. Bruce and Nell, thanks again for always your leadership of the township, our region. To Al and Linda, great lineup again of the Economic Conference. To Eric, y'all are so impressed with all the sponsors. Thank you so much for underwriting this important event. It's still one of my favorite conferences to do each year. I'm just relieved that the sequester didn't shut down this conference. I was talking to Roger Glass and Greg Brennan, and we've been through tough times in the 80s where I remember at the Chamber Conference, we lost half of our small business membership in 1 year. Think about the recession of the last 2 or 3 years. There's not a person in this room that hasn't tightened their belt 2%, and their business probably by a lot more. And in fact, earlier this morning, I had several people who said for a finder's fee, they'll do a whole lot more than 2% in this federal government. So I think we'll survive just fine. Let's talk a little about the economy, the Texas economy. We're in a whole different league than the rest of the country. Then talk about the U.S. growth gap, something that's troubling us and a red flag, and then how we change course, because this is America. We don't have to accept gaps in anything. So let's talk about that a minute. Here we are, Texas economy. You and I, we can't open the paper, can't look online a week that we don't find an article that talks about the growth in Texas, extraordinary growth in the Houston region, and here in Montgomery County as well. Our growth over the last decade is twice the national average. Let's see if this works. There it goes. Twice the national average. Growth over the last 2 years, twice the national average as well. 10 largest cities in America. Houston, of course, leads that by a significant margin. Our economy is a state, look at that, it's doubled the national economic growth over the last decade. Look at where we are in jobs, continuing to outpace the U.S. economy by a significant margin. Unemployment rate, same thing. This is Texas. We have a great business climate. We have low taxes. We have balanced regulation, but I can't help think there is something special about Texas. I love Conrad Hilton's quote, Texans dream big dreams and think big thoughts because there's nothing to hem them in. And in fact, that is part of what makes us so special. Let's talk about the U.S. economy, because there's no question it is improving. The numbers today for February were good. But here we are 3 years and 8 months after recovery began. 3 months and 8 months, 3 years and 8 months after the recovery began, we are improving. But this recovery is historically weak, and it needs to get much stronger. Look at this. Right now, you look at this blue area. This is the last 10 recoveries over the last almost 70 years. You can tell what the range of it is and what the average of our recovery is. And here we are. This is dead last for growth. Job recovery, again, here's sort of the range of the last 10 major recessions. And here we are sort of right at the outer and lower amounts of it. Unemployment, let's see. Here we go. This is one of the key things that continue to trouble us, the number of people who drop out of the workforce. You can tell, if you look at this today, it's dropped to 58% today. While the jobs number was strong, it beat expectations. It was great to see the lowering unemployment rate. The number of workers in the workforce fell again. We're at a 30-year low again. Some of that is because of seniors and baby boomers starting to retire, but that doesn't explain most of this. So that is one of the big challenges going forward. That's why our unemployment rate, while the official rate now 7.7%, fact is when we get those people back in the workforce, it's critical for our future growth that we do. Our unemployment rate is actually a lot higher than that, and that is one of the red flags as we go forward in this economy. One of the troubling parts of it, we've had, the good news is, we have increased and generated over 6 million jobs, now 6.4 million since the recession hit the down part. Here's the problem. Our food stamp families have grown even faster. Families that have been forced to go to food stamps just to deal with hunger in their own household has actually outpaced the number of families who have found a new job. That's not the sign of a healthy economy. One of the challenges, again, as we go forward, important that we create, again, continue to focus on job creation, because it has such a big part to do with that issue. Let's talk about the U.S. growth gap. There is a gap between this recovery and other recoveries. It's significant. And because the gap, it really intensifies in your federal government, intensifies the spending and the debt problems. And the cost of that gap today is about 4 million jobs we should have back in the workforce, and over $1 trillion that should be injected back in the economy today. The growth gap will continue to grow even wider, at least by economists' prediction, over the next 2 years. So we're not seeing the correction that we need to see. To correct it, to get back just to the average recovery over the next 4 years, you would need Reagan-style economic growth just to get back to average. And so we've got a challenge. You can tell where we are if we stay on the path we're on today. We're well below where we need to be, and which leads to another problem, which is, are we experiencing a new normal? Economists are asking themselves a lot right now, do we have a new normal in the economy? Wherein a number of economists are now saying the future U.S. economic growth will stay low permanently, that we have a different full employment number, that we have a slower growth figure. The average growth rate in America since around when I was born, 3.3%. Congressional Budget Office new estimate, consistent with a lot of economists, 2.3%. You think, well, 1%, that's not a big deal. It is. It takes us from the strong economic growth of America to the slower economic growth of Europe and the European Union, for example. The impact is that if you are content with the growth we have today, plodding along about 175,000 new jobs a month, which just barely gets above our population growth. That's what that feels like for a long time. And the difference is, under our normal rate, our economy doubles every 22 years. When we slow down, it doubles every 32 years. And when it comes to growth, 1% is a big deal. over time. Look at the difference, $20 trillion difference in the economy. That's bigger than today's economy total. That's what we lose by letting that gap continue in the future. Oops. And when it comes to paying down debt, U.S. government getting back to a balanced budget, our ability to save Social Security and Medicare in the long run, it also takes a big hit on spending on revenue for the federal government, $93 trillion in revenue. So just like in your business, growth matters in a major way, and that's why the growth gap, the thought that potentially our economy could be slowing down over the long term is a real issue. So, this being America, we don't have to accept projections like that. We can change course, especially when we know where some of the roadblocks are at. We talked about in past economic outlook conferences issues like the new health care law and the impact it's having on the economy today. We talked about the spending binge in Washington and how long-term it slows down the economy as well. There are three areas that we ought to right now act to change course and not only close that growth gap, but pump back up our long-term economic projections, and it can be done. Obviously, changing course in energy, we've got some immediate issues. Approving the Keystone XL pipeline sends a signal we really are serious about energy security, or more energy security in North America. Leasing public lands, a critical part. While private lands, our oil and gas companies are continuing to increase their exploration, but on public lands, it's going down. It's about a third of what it was in the past. Those are critical. That's critical access we need to have. But right now, two issues before us we ought to take advantage of. One, you're starting to see in Washington politics being played with companies that are developing oil or natural gas in America who want to sell it around the world. And we ought to let them. Other than the sanctions we put on countries like Iran and the export controls we put on real sensitive military technology that can be used for two uses in China and others, we ought not restrict commodities that we produce in America, especially something as valuable as natural gas and energy. My thought is, and we're introducing legislation here in about 2 weeks, that restricts the ability of the government to permit natural gas exports except to countries that sponsor terrorism. Other than that, we ought to be free to sell because, as you know, we ought not restrict the automobiles that are sold around the world, the computers from Hewlett-Packard. And when someone says, look, we just need to stop being sold from around the world, that'll lower the price. No, that just means they won't get built. And the price will stay the same. And our economy will suffer. I think when it comes to energy, we ought to adopt the Blue Belt principle, which is we eat all we can and we sell the rest. And that ought to be our issue on it. Also, we've had, in the most recent 5-year leasing plan offshore, the White House has started to significantly restrict and pull back leasing opportunities offshore around the country, actually making it even a narrower opportunity for our energy companies around this country. Here's a map that shows what's off limits in America today: the Pacific Coast, the Atlantic Coast, most of the eastern Gulf of Mexico, some of our public lands as well. And I'm working with one of our senators to introduce legislation that not only directs the White House to develop and release a new 5-year leasing plan that opens up these areas, but because of frustration we've had where states not only control exploration in state waters, they direct it to the government in federal waters. I've never understood why we allow that to happen. Florida, New Jersey, states like California, states like that. So we're turning the tables. And now we're going to allow states to direct the U.S. government to explore in the waters, in the federal waters off their states like Virginia, and direct, not only identify the top 3 leasing areas, but require the federal government to act on it. The result of doing that, the result of just opening up more access over time, both onshore and offshore, is 1 million jobs in America, good paying jobs. for every skill, from the unskilled, the research and technology. We ought not miss this opportunity. Changing course on regulation. We talked before about how costly, and you know it firsthand because you live it as business people. The number of regulation coming out of Washington is staggering. The last 2 years have set a record. The only administration to add 80,000 pages of new regulation to the Federal Register 2 years in a row. It's costly. $200 billion a year. Businesses like yours. $500 billion just since 2008 for an average small business in this room. What that means in real life is about $10,000 more per worker every year to comply with the regulations coming out of Washington. There's no question they're a real roadblock to our growth, and the problem is it's growing. The number of regulations coming out in healthcare this year, in Dodd-Frank, the number of the environmental regulations that were held back before the election is really staggering. And one of the things that caught my eye is that if you look at average last several years, we're seeing about 3,500 regulations a year, Greg, come out of Washington, D.C. and land on top of you. A question is anyone looking at the cost and the benefit of these regulations and how they affect our economy? The answer is yes, but guess how many of those regulations undergo a thorough cost-benefit analysis? 13. 13 of those regulations are certified independently, but they've actually taken a look at their impact on jobs, impact on public safety, impact on the economy as well. Many agencies are even prohibited, like the EPA, from even considering cost-benefit analysis. Some agencies do the cost, they don't do the benefit. Oftentimes we see bias going, and so it is time. I've introduced the Sound Regulation Act, we're getting ready to, that basically expands cost-benefit analysis to all the independent agencies that are exempt today, the SEC, the FCC, the Federal Reserve, lowers the threshold to $50 million impact, so we're catching more of these regulations before they can cause problems, and set standards so that you and I can actually see how we develop these analysis before we actually get hit with them as a business. Let's finish with tax reform, because this is a key area where we can change course in the growth gap as well. We don't need, I think we all agree on the need for tax reform. It's gotten costly, huge drag on our economy. Small businesses are crying out. A new poll from a week ago, 85% of small businesses say enact fundamental tax reform now because of the complexity, because of the cost, and around the world we've now become uncompetitive with much of the world in our international tax reform. The Ways and Means Committee that I serve on is dead set on moving forward with fundamental tax reform this session. We've already released drafts on international and corporate reform to lower the rates to 25%, to make sure we're taxing our businesses here at home, but not when they compete around the world. Make sure that we have equality and parity between our larger corporations and our small businesses and pass-through companies we think is important. That reform is important to the CBIs, the Anadarkos, the Baker Hughes, and the others who are in this room today, critical for their competitiveness. We released a draft on financial services to deal with the derivatives and tax treatment, a number of those exotic type instruments. That's important to companies that actually hedge because they have a product and that they deliver, like airlines and energy industries as well. And if you've ever gone out for capital, you know that you probably come up against 20-something math geeks who come up with exotic derivatives that suck capital away from companies that are actually producing them. And so modernizing that's critical. Then on Tuesday, we're going to release a small business reform that I think you're going to like, and I'd like to have your feedback on it. It really focuses on making it easier for small businesses to comply with taxes, to raise money, to do cash accounting, to do the things that can operate without the complexity of code. We're going to release it Tuesday out of Ways and Means Committee. I'd love to have your thoughts on if that might be a help or not. And then our goal on the individual rates for you and I, paying as families and individuals, is to have no more than two rates, a 10% for most Americans and no more than a 25% rate for top earners in America. We think we can do that. Our goal is to create a pro-growth tax code that's fair, flatter, and simpler, that lowers rates, that closes the number of lobbyist loopholes in there, and is revenue neutral. The truth of the matter is, Washington has all the money they need. They don't have all the money they want, and they need to learn the difference. So we're not going to help in the tax code. Bruce mentioned this on tax reform. We just, Chairman Dave Camp, just announced a number of working groups, bipartisan working groups, 11 of them, to focus on tax reform. I'm chairing the energy tax reform, and my goal is to create a tax code that encourages affordable energy driven by the free market, not by government. Pro-code, growth code that understands in energy the cost of capital matters. The cost of capital matters in a big way. Lowering rates is one thing. After-tax cost of capital drives so much of the energy area. I want to encourage a wide variety of energy production here at home without picking winners and losers in the tax code. And our report, we're moving fast. Our report's due May 6th, but it's going to be another step in moving tax reform together forward. And our timetable as a committee is to move a comprehensive, fundamental change and improvement of our tax code in this year. We don't know if the President's going to join us. We're not sure what the Senate is going to do. But what we do know is if we don't put that tax reform ball on the field and start moving it down that field, we absolutely know it will never score. So it's long overdue. It's time to do it, and we're dead set on it. So, let's stop and take questions, but I still love Milton Friedman's quote, underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. The truth is, a lot of the solutions for our economy are sitting and standing in this room today. We've just got to believe more in the freedom of the market and a lot less in the role of government in our lives. Now, Jim, can I stop and take, I think we're right at the time limit. You want to take a question? Yeah, well, actually, that's the fastest I've ever talked in my life. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
I tell you, it's a lot to absorb. I know. I can hear the brains ticking out there. Congressman Brady, we just want to tell you how much we appreciate everything you do in Washington, D.C., of course, but also right here in our backyard. We are very proud to have you as our neighbor. Let's give him another round of applause. I asked him if he was going to be around for a little bit. He said, no, I've got a flight to catch. I think that's the story of his life.